Hello and welcome to episode 581 of the People Behind the Science podcast. As many of you know, the month of November is Alzheimer's Disease Awareness Month, and we are excited to be capping off the month with one more episode featuring an outstanding researcher who has made great strides in better understanding memory. This week, we are rebroadcasting our interview with Dr. Rodrigo Quian Quiroga, originally published on February 19th, 2018. Among his many scientific achievements in the field of memory research, Rodrigo discovered what are now known as concept cells, neurons in the human brain that play a key role in memory formation. Through his work, we are gaining a better understanding of the basic neuroscience behind how memories are made, and this information is key for future research into how we may be able to better preserve memory function. So listeners, I hope you enjoy this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the People Behind the Science podcast. Today, I am delighted to introduce you all to Dr. Rodrigo Quian Quiroga. So, Rodrigo, welcome to our show today. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for calling.
Absolutely. We're excited to chat with you more about your work and what you're up to these days. But before we dive into all those details, I'm going to spend some time introducing you to our listeners. So listeners, Rodrigo is a professor and director of the Center for Systems Neuroscience at the University of Leicester in the United Kingdom. He's also an author of the books Borges and Memory, Principles of Neural Coding, Imaging Brain Function with EEG, and the recently published book, The Forgetting Machine. Rodrigo received his undergraduate training in physics from the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, and he was awarded his PhD in applied mathematics from the University of Luebeck in Germany. Rodrigo was a postdoctoral fellow at the Research Center Juelich in Germany, and he received a Sloan Fellowship to conduct research at the California Institute of Technology. Rodrigo also worked briefly at RIKEN in Japan, as well as the University of Nijmegen in the Netherlands. Rodrigo has received numerous awards and honors, including the Royal Society Wolfson Research Merit Award, a Young Investigator Award from the American Epilepsy Society, and he was also named one of the 10 UK Rise Leaders in Science and Engineering in 2014. And listeners, Rodrigo is here with us today to talk about his experiences in life and in science. So Rodrigo, we want to get to know you both as a scientist, but also as a person today. So can you start by telling us what you like to do when you're not very busy doing work in the lab?
I have a family, so I spend time with my kids, my wife. I like doing a bit of sports. I like actually things that get me out of the lab and I can refresh my head doing something that has completely nothing to do with thinking about experiments and stuff. But yeah, there's not much doing some sport. I mean, spending time with the family. Do
you have a favorite sport?
Yeah, I do judo.
Excellent. So you're a judo master. So we wouldn't want to get in a fight with you on the street, would we, Rodrigo?
Yeah, I wouldn't call myself a master, but yeah, I like doing a bit of judo.
Very cool. Well, great to get a window into how you spend your time when you're not busy at work. But I do want to talk about your science next. So can you tell us how you describe what you do at work to someone who's not familiar with neuroscience or your research specifically?
Yeah, I work on memory. So basically, I'm puzzled to understand how memory works and how the brain works in general. I mean, how do these zillions of neurons that we have in our brain make us see, make us feel something, make us make a decision or remember? And in my specific work, I do work on memory. So I try to understand how memories are formed, how memories store for years to come, how memories are consolidated. I mean, all processes that have to do with memory.
Certainly. And I think memory is something people can kind of immediately understand and relate to at least a little bit. So it makes it a little easier to communicate what you do to people outside of science, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I know there's a lot to get done in the day of a scientist, and I myself am always looking for little things to motivate me and keep me going. So do you have a favorite quote or a saying or a force that really keeps you going in every day?
I think I don't. I'm pretty bad for these things. I don't have a quote that drives me. I mean, basically, I'm just a curious guy. I just come to the lab because I'm curious to know what will happen with the experiments we're doing. I just cannot wait to see the results. So I cannot really relate to a quote that keeps me going in my research, but it's just that, the passion to do what I like doing.
I like it. Well, passion and curiosity are great motivating forces, I think. So that works great. Now, are there particular people who you can think back to, Rodrigo, who maybe first inspired you to pursue science or served as role models or mentors along the way?
Well, I don't know if inspired, but I learned a lot from my mentor in Germany. So when I went to Germany, I did a PhD in applied mathematics. And then I did a postdoc in dynamical systems and chaos theory and this type of thing. So it was back to hardcore physics. And my mentor in physics, his name is Peter Grasberger, and I knew him as an amazing scientist. But I really like his attitude, his way of doing science. I mean, his ethics, scientific ethics, and the way he will approach a problem, the way he will approach the scientific system. So I try to copy him a little bit because I really like the way he manages his group and he has his ethics. Like, for example, this guy will never publish a paper if he doesn't feel like he has something important to say. So he would rather not publish something that he thought it wasn't important enough. The nice thing is that going to conferences and talking to people that know him, he's known to be a very solid guy. I mean, if he will say something, you can trust him. So I really like this for a scientist. So I try more or less to follow him in this respect.
Certainly. Well, I think you mentioned some really important traits for a successful scientist. And I'm curious to hear where your own scientific journey began, Rodrigo. Can you take us back to the very beginning? And is there a particular memory where you first started getting excited about science or maybe first had that curiosity sparked for you?
Well, I studied physics and math, but I was always interested in how the brain works. So I studied back in Argentina, although I was doing physics, I was doing some projects related to EEG recordings. And I had long discussions with my mentor at the time in Argentina, Horacio Garcia, and he's a neurologist, and he was telling me different things about patients and how to analyze EEG. And yeah, I saw it as something that is amazing, no? I mean, completely different to what I was doing. I was doing my first degree in chaos theory. And I always try to find bridges to have excuses to keep going with brain research. So I was always fascinated about the brain, even when I was studying physics.
Certainly. So what got you interested in physics to begin with? I think chaos theory is not something that kids are maybe normally in tune to and something they want to study as an adult.
Well, chaos theory was the excuse because it's a very funny story, very frustrating at first, but I'm happy that this happened. So the story is that I was studying physics and I was doing my final year project in chaos theory. And I saw some results of people that they claim that the brain is a chaotic system. And then they were measuring EEG signals and they were trying to show that the EEG signals are a chaotic system. And I spent quite some time trying to replicate these results. So I was doing my own recordings and with this mentor that I mentioned before in Argentina. And he also got interested. And that was amazing because a neurologist getting interested into chaos theory was quite unique. But this guy was very open and he really liked having these discussions and different points of view. So I tried really my best to try to replicate these results. I mean, showing that the brain is a chaotic system, and I couldn't get it. I really couldn't get it. And at the end of the day, my thesis ended up being delayed really, really long. I mean, it took me ages. It took me much more than I would have done something different. And I ended up learning that these results were wrong. And even worse than that, I ended up learning with time that not even the question made sense. So anybody that knew a bit about the brain would say, well, why would you want to know that? I mean, that tells us nothing. But I'm thankful to having wasted a bit of my time because that somehow got me into the right field because that's what I wanted to do. I mean, I was entering the field with the wrong question, but it was a good exercise because as a physicist, I learned the hard way that sometimes it's important to attack the right questions and not spending a lot of time coming up with very clever solutions for problems nobody cares about.
Certainly. And I think just initially being able to explore your curiosity is a nice freedom to have and a way that people get excited about science to begin with. So were you a particularly curious kid when you were growing up?
Well, let me put it this way, because sometimes you hear scientists talking and it feels like we're scientists since we are like born, more or less. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't my case. I was lazy. I was okay at school, but I was never one of the best in the class. There were people doing way better than me. I was also not one of the best at university. I was good. I mean, I was doing fine, but definitely not one of the best. So when I grew up, I didn't care much about science. I care about doing sports, having fun, meeting my friends, doing stuff that teenagers or 20 years guys will do. And then the science got me. When I moved to Germany, science was serious, because that became my full-time job. Before I had a scholarship to do some investigations, but I was still doing sports. I was doing different things. But when I moved to Germany to do my PhD, then that became my full-time job. And that was the point when I started taking very seriously.
Certainly. And I love this phrase that you used there, the science got you. And I think at that moment when you kind of decide that this is going to be something that you're excited and passionate about is a big turning point. And I know since that moment in Germany, you were able to study at a lot of different places across the globe. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences that brought you now to where you are today?
Well, I grew up in Argentina. I studied first in Argentina, did physics in Argentina. Then I moved to Germany. Actually, I didn't know I was doing a PhD. So at the time I moved to Germany, I moved because I got a fellowship, a very good fellowship. And I went there just to do research. But at some point, my mentor in Germany told me, well, actually, you can present this as a PhD.
Oh, wow.
I think I was one of the fastest PhDs in the university because I presented a thesis after 2 years of being in Germany.
That's amazing.
But because I was full-time doing that. When I was in Argentina, I was doing 20 other things. But when I moved to Germany, all this energy that I have spread into many different things, which I love doing, then they all got into doing my PhD. And then I moved to another place in Germany when I met the person that I mentioned before, Peter Grasberger, to work on dynamical systems. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when I was in Argentina, I didn't travel much because Argentina is too far, it's too expensive to travel. So I didn't know much of the world. So I used the opportunity. The moment I was in Germany, I was traveling everywhere. Then I got an offer to go to Japan, and I was crazy because I did Judo, so I loved the idea of going to Japan and see the Japanese culture. And then I had friends in Holland, so they invited me to go to Holland, and then I ended up in California. So I was traveling quite a bit, and I was enjoying meeting different people and having different projects, different ideas. So that's the way I built up my career until I settled a bit more in Leicester. Then I have family here, and things changed. I'm not the person traveling a lot as before.
Certainly. And now I know you have a lot of exciting things going on there in the lab at the University of Leicester today. So is there a particular project that you're really excited about that you want to tell us about in a little bit more detail?
The most important one, I think, is what I said at first, is memory. We do very unique recordings because we can record neurons in the human brain directly. So I can record up to, say, 100 neurons in a person that is talking to me. So while this person is talking to me, I can see what the neurons of this person do. And I'm not talking about EEG or fMRI. These are single neurons. This is done for clinical reasons, these recordings, because these are patients suffering from epilepsy. So then they are candidates to surgery because they cannot be treated with medication. And before going to surgery, in most cases, they will first implant electrodes inside the brain for about a week or so to try to determine where the seizures come from. And I have access to these recordings. The patient stay in hospital for about 1 week. And I can analyze these recordings while the patient do different tasks. I study memory processes while I record activity of neurons in the area that is known to be key for memory, which is called the hippocampus. So I can record from dozens of neurons in the hippocampus while the patient does different memory tasks and trying to understand how memory works. And that's a thing that I found most interesting from what we're doing now.
Certainly. And I know many people out there might be familiar with some of the different kinds of memory. Is there a particular area of memory that you're focused on right now?
Yeah, it's what is called episodic memory. Let's get into the big taxonomy. So memory is divided into declarative memories and non-declarative memories. Declarative memories are all these things you can name. You can put a name to the memory. Non-declarative memories are things like you remember how to ride your bicycle or how to tie your shoelaces. These are also, people call it procedural memories. Mm-hmm. Now, of the declarative memories, things you can name, you can subdivide it into two groups, which are semantic memories and episodic memories. Semantic memories are memories of facts. Like, for example, the typical example is Paris is the capital of France. That's a fact. And that's a semantic memory. Episodic memories are memories of my life experiences. Like I went last month to see this movie in the cinema. So that's my personal memory. Mm-hmm. And the memories I'm most interested on are exactly this one, the episodic memories, because we know that they depend on the hippocampus, which is the area I study. But there are other more philosophical reasons, because this type of memories makes us who we are. There's a long discussion going on in philosophy. What are we? What defines our identity? And one of the big answers to that is it is our memory that defines our identity. So basically, I'm trying to understand the processes that create the very basic things that make us who we are, which is our memory, our episodic memory.
Certainly. And I think maybe closely tied to memory, you do a lot of research on visual perception. And I know you've done a lot of work in the area of perception of art, which I think is really cool because you don't often see the worlds of art and the worlds of science coming together. So can you tell us a little bit about this work?
I got invited to give many talks about that, and I always start the same way, trying to illustrate exactly what you just said. The world of arts and the world of science, they really don't interact. And it's very weird because we have so much to learn from each other. But if you think about it, it's understandable that they don't interact, because I don't see many of my scientific colleagues getting interested into art, because art is the realm of subjectivity. And it's very hard to get objective truth from studying art. So it's very hard to apply the scientific method to the study of art. And on the other hand, if you talk to artists and they know that you're a scientist, sometimes they have this first aversive reaction saying, well, you cannot really come up with formulas about art. You cannot really try to make art like a scientific study. It has nothing to do with that. Art has to do with emotions and how we feel things. It's not like what you study in science. But I still think I can try to understand things. But for me, the most important bit of it is that I learn from artists, because you mentioned visual perception. I think Rembrandt knew much more about visual perception than myself after, 20 years of studying visual perception. I can tell you what neurons do in the brain, but how do we see? I guess somebody that paints like Rembrandt knows this much, much better than me. And I think it's a pity to ignore this information. I think it's a pity not to go and talk to these people, because I think they have a lot to teach us scientists. And it goes the other way around. No? I mean, I interacted with a very good visual artist from Argentina, Mariano Molina, and he spent 1 year in my lab, and he was teaching me a lot of things of how he sees art and how he sees visual perception. And at the same time, he was learning many things from studying the neuroscience of visual perception. So I think it's a win-win situation, and that's why I love it. I mean, every time I can interact with an artist, I'm all for it, because on the one hand, I think we have a lot to learn from each other. And on the other hand, me as a scientist, it typically gives me a completely new approach to address a problem.
Well, I love that you're getting those conversations going and having those interactions with artists. And I absolutely agree that both can learn a lot from each other. But so far, we've talked about a lot of the exciting things that you're working on, Rodrigo, and the exciting path that you took to get to where you are today. But we haven't really touched on some of the challenges and the struggles. And I love bringing these up on our program so that our listeners can learn from the lessons of people who came before them. So, Rodrigo, do you have a failure or a challenge or a struggle, one that you're either going through right now or that you went through in the past, that you can tell us about today and kind of talk us through how you're working through it?
It's hard to point at one. I have like zillions. So I started my career in science with a huge frustration. Mm-hmm. And this is what I was mentioning at the beginning. I was trying to apply chaos theory to electroencephalograms. And at the time, I didn't have anybody to come and tell me, man, that doesn't make sense. Don't waste your time. I wasted 2 years of my life doing that. And I worked really hard, no? And I was trying my best to realize at the end, well, this doesn't make sense. It's all wrong. And it's not just that it's wrong. It just doesn't make sense. And that was a big frustration, but that got me into track. So this frustration was the one that was starting to shape my career in science. That was my very first step in science. It was wrong, but I learned from the mistake. And I think if there's something that characterizes a successful scientist, is that if you hear me giving a talk, you will see one thing after the other, and then you will say, wow, that's amazing. Well, maybe not. Maybe you won't think that's amazing, but imagine that you think something is amazing. Mm-hmm. But I'm not telling you about the other 50 things that I tried before that, before I make this thing work. So you see the end result of a process that maybe took typically a few years. So we run an experiment, we have an idea, we run an experiment, and then you see the result and you say, wow, amazing. But you don't know that to get this result, I have to struggle like hell, because the experiment didn't work at first. We got something different, and then we have to rethink the whole idea. And then we realize, well, it's not what we wanted, but it's something different. And this something different might be also interesting. So I think a good scientist is used to these frustrations. So I think one of the main attitudes, or one of the main characteristics of a good scientist is resilience. You can punch him again and again, but you will never knock him down. I mean, the scientist will always stand up and try again, because it's not just science, it's the scientific system as well. You write a paper, you send it to the best journal, and you put a couple of years of your life into this paper because it's an experiment that took you a couple of years. you collected all the data and then you think you have an amazing story. But then your colleagues will say, well, actually, that's not good enough. That's not interesting. And you cannot publish it in the journal you wanted to publish it. And that's very disappointing. And then you try another journal and maybe they say no. And at the end, you end up publishing it in a really good journal. But that was your third choice. Mm-hmm. And people will see the paper published in a top journal and they will say, wow, you published really high. You published really good. And say, yeah, but I have to go through the process of being rejected twice. Sometimes you get papers accepted first time. Sometimes you really have to fight for it. The same with the grant system. Sometimes you say, oh, I have an amazing idea. You write a grant, so you want to get money to do your research, and for some stupid reason, they turn you down. And you say, that's not fair. I mean, it's an amazing idea. I put a lot of effort into developing this idea of a project, and then I'm turned down due to stupid reasons. But the only way is you keep going. You keep trying again. You don't just give up. And I think sometimes people quit in science is because they cannot take it anymore. They say, well, I'm tired of this and I give up. I don't want to do this anymore.
Certainly. And I think you're not alone in these frustrations and rejections and failures. They're rampant in science. Was there ever a point in your career, Rodrigo, though, where you thought of walking away and doing something different?
No, not walking away, because I think I am doing something different. I will never quit science because it's silly. I mean, I spent 20, 30 years to build up a career to be where I am. So what I try to do instead of quitting science, I don't take it that bad. If I get these rejections and seeing it, well, that's the way it is. I just learn to cope with it and move on. But what I try to do instead of doing this break and say, well, from now on, I don't want to be a scientist anymore. I want to be an artist. But that would be silly for me because I have a good position. Everything works okay. And what I do is, well, I keep on doing my science, but I try to get into art. So I might be a scientist that is a bit different than standard, but that's okay. But I wouldn't just stop my career to do something else. So I keep going with science. I'm still fascinated by science. I'm still puzzled and curious about the questions we talk about, as from the first day I started seeing EEG signals. But I also allow myself not to do the standard scientific career. And if I'm not the best scientist, I don't care. I mean, that's not what I want. I want to enjoy doing other things as well. One of them is, for example, getting a lot into arts.
Certainly. Well, I love that you're able to draw some of your other interests into the work that you do. I think that's wonderful. And we don't just want to talk about your difficult times, Rodrigo. I'd love to talk about some of your successes. And I know you have many to choose from in this arena as well. But is there a particular success story that you want to tell us about today?
Well, I think the thing I'm most known for is what people call this Jennifer Aniston neuron, which is my karma. It's something that is following me. Like my grave will say, here lies the guy that discovered the Jennifer Aniston neuron. I'm known as the Jennifer Aniston neuron guy. So it was a nice story for me because I came from physics and mathematics. That's what I was doing. And I could have done my career in that. I mean, I could have kept going with physics. I was doing okay. I was publishing a few papers about dynamical systems and synchronization of chaotic systems. And people were liking these papers. And I thought, well, maybe I can follow it. But at some point I say, no, man, that's not what I want. I really want to get into the brain. I really want to understand how the brain works. And that's the question really puzzles me. And relatively late in my career, I changed and then I started doing neuroscience. So I stopped doing physics, I stopped doing math, and then I only care about neuroscience. And the Jennifer Aniston neuron is kind of like the end result of this big jump. So in my case, it really paid off because what happened is that I moved to Caltech and then I started studying recordings from neurons, and I have never seen a neuron before. I have never seen how the neurons work before. So I started learning there. But then I was having a whole baggage of things that I learned from my background in math and physics. And the trick was like, well, the moment I learned a little bit of neuroscience, I realized, I can use this type of things to solve this problem. And these people, I mean, they don't know how to do it, well, because it's not what they do. I mean, they know how the brain works, but they don't know all the tricks that we people have in mathematics and physics. So I think my first success in neuroscience was to put some of these tricks together to come up with a new method to identify neurons from recordings. So if you get a recording from a monkey or from a human, as I end up doing later, or from a rat or whatever, you can see the activity of different neurons. So I was using some mathematical tricks to come up with a method to see more neurons than other methods around. And this worked very well. And the nice thing is that thanks to the use of this algorithm plus a couple other tricks, I ended up discovering these neurons that people didn't see before. So that was very rewarding in this sense. I was older than other neuroscientists because I had spent like most of my time doing physics and math. But at some point it paid off because I could use my background, different background, to discover new things that other people couldn't see before.
Certainly. And for any of our listeners out there who might not be familiar with these concept cells or Jennifer Aniston neurons, can you tell us in a kind of high level view what they are?
Yeah, so in these recordings I mentioned before, we record from epileptic patients that get electrodes implanted. We can see many neurons simultaneously. And then the experiments we were doing at the time was basically showing pictures. So I will come to the patient with my laptop and I will show different pictures. And this involves a lot of signal processing and so on to see neurons that are very, very hard to identify in principle. But if you do some tricks, you can start seeing these neurons. And then I start finding these neurons that they will respond to particular people. And the most famous of these was actually the first one that I found doing that was a neuron that fired to Jennifer Aniston. So whenever I put a picture of Jennifer Aniston in my computer screen, the neuron will fire. Whenever I put any other person, the neuron will not fire at all. And the surprising thing for neuroscientists was that it's not that the neuron fired to one picture of Jennifer Aniston. The neuron fired to any picture of Jennifer Aniston. So I can show her in whatever way I will show her different pictures, looking front view, profile, with different dressing or haircuts, the neuron will fire. So this meant that the neuron was firing to the concept. The neuron was firing to Jennifer Aniston and not to the details of a particular picture I could have used. And that was new. Nobody expected to find that. And that opened a whole line of research, which is the research I'm still doing, which is basically trying to understand why do we have neurons firing to concepts in an area, the hippocampus, which is known to be involved in memory. And my main point is that the skeleton of memory is to remember concepts and make associations between concepts. And that's basically what we are still studying until now.
So what was going through your mind when you first started seeing this pattern of a particular neuron responding only to Jennifer Aniston?
I remember what I did. I don't remember what was going through my mind. I remember jumping out of my chair. I literally remember the moment. That was more than 15 years ago. I remember seeing the response of this neuron firing to all these different pictures of Jennifer Aniston and to nothing else. And I remember it was very late. And I remember jumping out of my chair and staring my computer for a while because I couldn't believe what I was seeing in my computer display. I couldn't believe the result. And after that, it's not just Jennifer Aniston. As I mentioned, we found a neuron firing to Jennifer Aniston. Then I had another one firing to Halle Berry, to different pictures of Halle Berry. Even if I will write the name Halle Berry, then you will fire. I have another one firing to Oprah Winfrey. I have another one firing to Luke Skywalker, the Tower of Pizza, in the Opera House. You name it. We have like hundreds of neurons firing to very specific concepts.
Certainly. And you talk a little bit about these concept cells and the discovery of them in your book that we mentioned in our introduction, The Forgetting Machine. And I'm curious to hear about what drew you to start writing books, because you've written a couple of them now.
Well, as a scientist, I'm a frustrated writer. When I was a teenager, one of the things I wanted to do is to write. And I'm not planning to quit science, but if I will quit science, the job that I would seriously consider doing is to be, for example, a science fiction writer, because I love it. I love reading science fiction. So there are still scientific books, but I try to get a bit outside the typical scientific writing. So it's not like writing an article for a journal. So when I write a book, it's nice because I can let myself free a bit more. So I can think more of questions and different aspects related to science that I wouldn't put into scientific publication. So I like writing because it's kind of like being wide open. Whereas when I write a scientific paper, as any scientist, typically I tend to be more narrow because I will discuss a very specific problem, which is in technical writing. It's not written for the general public. But when I write a book, it's different, no? Because I try to convey, well, look, man, I'm doing something that I think is amazing and I want to tell you why. Hopefully I can show you that there's something amazing that is going on in science and you cannot really ignore it because it's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And for doing that, I like to put a little bit of philosophy into it because we are not the first people thinking about this type of problems. We talk about memory and how memory defines who we are, how memory works. And Aristotle was thinking about this already. Many people, many philosophers, they have been asking themselves exactly the same questions. So I think it's pretty cool to contrast the views of philosophy with the solid evidence that neuroscience gives, because it gives you a very broad spectrum. And that's what I like. That's what I really enjoy trying to bring in when I write a book.
Wonderful. We will definitely include The Forgetting Machine on our book list on our website. But Rodrigo, is there another book that you've really enjoyed, whether it was a recent read or one from long ago, that you want to recommend for our listeners today?
Well, I'm not recommending my book, but before writing this one, I wrote one called Borges and Memory. And if you do not know who Jorge Luis Borges was, go and find a book of Borges. Read any book of Borges, and you will be shocked. Borges used to write short stories, and he was amazing. What he was writing was incredible. Any book of Borges is fabulous. There are compilations of stories. One is called The Aleph, and it has many, many beautiful short stories in there.
Excellent. Well, we will put Borges on our website and list a couple of his works there. And I know we've touched a couple times during our conversation on some of the places that you've been for the work that you're doing. And I think travel is a big part of the life of a scientist. So do you have a favorite place that you've been, Rodrigo, for science, whether it was for training or for a conference or for any other purpose?
There are many places that have been really, really nice. If it is a conference, I cannot dissociate it from the people that have been to the conference, because sometimes you can have a conference that is not in the best place, but you end up meeting people that are amazing, or maybe neuroscientists that you know their names and you think, oh, these are big guys. And then you meet this big shot that you thought, well, it's a guy that will never talk to me, especially if you're a student, no? I mean, when you're younger. Mm-hmm. And then the guy ends up having a beer with you, and he's like the most natural person you can meet, and he will discuss ideas and so on. And as a student, you're discussing with a big professor that you think is half God, and this guy is the nicest guy. And I have many experiences like that in conferences, because I met very nice people that are really, really good at what they do, and they are very happy to talk to students. So it goes together. It's not just the place and the setting of the conference. It's also the people you meet there.
Certainly. I absolutely agree. I think meeting these science heroes and discovering that they're just down to earth kind of regular people is a revelation, especially for a lot of students. So do you have a particular maybe conference, especially when you were younger, that you went to where you had one of these meetings of chance happen with one of these scientific heroes?
When I moved out from Argentina, I was going to Germany. So there was a guy, I was reading his papers at the time, and his name is Fernando López da Silva. And I remember him because I loved what this guy did. Of course, in Argentina, I never met him because this guy never came to Argentina, and I didn't have money to travel to conferences in Europe or in the US. So when I moved to Germany, I took a flight to Spain, and then I was making my way up by train. I mean, I was taking different trains and stopping in different places. And one of the stops was Amsterdam, because I wanted to know Amsterdam. And then I was there and I realized, oh my God, this is the city where Fernando López da Silva lives, because I know from his papers that he's at the University of Amsterdam. And it was so weird. I was bringing just 2 bags with me, and that's all what I got from my country. And among these bags, I had like a copy of 10 different papers, and one of the papers was a paper of López da Silva. And I just saw the address in the paper, in the author affiliation, and I just went there. I took a bus, and I went to the University of Amsterdam. I looked for the physiology department and so on. I started asking. And I ended up finding his office, and I ended up talking to his secretary, and she told me, well, he's not here now, but he's coming maybe in a couple of hours. So I went for coffee. And then he came and found me in the cafeteria, and he was the nicest guy I ever met. I mean, he was amazing. And I still remember very vividly, he invited me to go and see the hospital where they did recordings. So the next day, I was spending the whole day with him. And that was for me like the big pope. Mm-hmm. Somebody that is unreachable, that I will never see because I'm so far in Argentina. This guy is driving the field and so on. And I wasn't even a PhD student at the time. I was just a physics student that just finished. And he just talked to me as he's talking to one of his colleagues. And I found this amazing. I still remember it very vividly.
Oh, that is phenomenal. And I love this story. And I love that you emphasize the people that you get to work with in science, because I think there are so many stereotypes out there about what scientists are like, and they're not all good. And I think people don't realize that many of the people that you get to work with are these funny, fun, amazing, down-to-earth, incredible scientists. And we love to emphasize this on our own show by sharing some of these memories of the people that you get to work with in science and some of the fun things that you do when you're together, whether it's quirky lab traditions or just fun outings that you go on together. So do you have another memory of your own that you want to share that really shows this human side of science?
There are so many things. I cannot come up with one specific memory, but at the end of the day, you cannot say that all scientists are like that, but you don't have to work with all of them. You don't have to meet all of them. There are a large number of scientists that they are really, really beautiful persons, and they're amazing at their science, and they are amazing as human beings. And it's very enjoyable to meet these people and go for a beer and, have dinner with them or meet them in conferences. And there are also others that they're not as bright as scientists, but they're still beautiful people and they're amazing friends. And who cares? I don't care where you publish your paper. If you are a good person, why would I not talk to you? Why you cannot be my friend? I'm not just interacting only with all the best scientists. I think it's a nice environment. You have everything in any profession, but this stereotype of the scientist as being somebody that you cannot talk to, you cannot approach, in most cases, I think is wrong. Everybody is like a normal person.
Certainly. Now, within your own lab, are there opportunities for your lab group to kind of get together outside the lab, or do you have any traditions that you like to do with your research group?
Well, typically about an hour from now, we will go for a beer. So Friday is beer day. So Friday, this 5 p.m. tea of England is not like that. It's 5 p.m. beer. Mm-hmm. It's like British precision, 5 p.m. Well, actually 6 typically we go for a pint. And it's nice. I like it because we can all relax and we can chat. And sometimes very good ideas come out because we're not talking within the constraint of a scientific conversation. We're just talking about whatever in a pub. We start discussing and then we say, oh, that's something we really have to think about it further because that could be a very nice idea for an experiment. So I really enjoy meeting colleagues and the guys from my center in the pub and just talking about everything.
Certainly. And I love that you brought up the idea that oftentimes these conversations can lead to productive research endeavors. And I love taking away these constraints that normally limit how you think about your science. And I know you're answering some phenomenal questions in the lab today, but Rodrigo, if I took away all the constraints, things like funding and staff and technology and feasibility, is there one question that you are just dying to know the answer to that you would want to tackle?
Well, I go step by step, but the question I'm dying to know the answer to is the question that I'm doing experiments to answer. If I will have all the funding and if I will have the possibility of doing something I cannot do, I'm not thinking much of that. I think we can do amazing things with the technology we have nowadays. And my questions are more practical. Like we have this technology, it will be a lot of effort, but this is exactly what I want to know. And my question now is memory, is how exactly we form a memory and how we can consolidate the memory, how we forget, and all that has to do with this process of the dynamic of forming a memory, establishing a memory, and maybe having a memory that will last for the rest of your life or that you maybe forget. All this process that is done by thousands of neurons in this area called the hippocampus is what really puzzles me now. That's the question I want to answer now.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited to hear that you're able to answer or start working towards answering that question that you're so passionate about. And for all of our listeners out there who are working on their own scientific journeys, do you have a particular piece of advice that you received at some point during your career that you found really helpful that you want to pass on to them today?
Don't listen to advice.
I like it.
I actually have a funny story related to that. Mm-hmm. I won't say names, but when I started in neuroscience as a physicist and mathematician, I wanted to attack this problem that I mentioned, trying to get more information from the recordings. And I thought, well, maybe if I use a cocktail of different methods from mathematics and physics, specifically 2 methods that I put together, I think that could do really well. And I met one of the big shots that was an expert in exactly this problem. I mean, he was like one of the most renowned persons. And he was a bit arrogant. And he was basically saying, well, I solved this problem already. Why will you waste your time on this and that? And basically his advice was, don't do it. And that was exactly what I was needing to put all my energy in doing it. So, yeah, that was a good advice. Don't do it. Yeah. Because there's nothing that will convince me to try something that somebody's saying, don't do it. I mean, it won't work because I want to prove this guy that it will work.
It was exactly what you needed to hear at the time, right?
Yeah.
Well, Rodrigo, do you have any other last message you want to leave our listeners with today?
I think that the main thing I would say as a scientist, I mean, if there are scientists listening or maybe like a high school kid that is wondering what is neuroscience, how can you live out of studying the brain or whatever you do. For me as a scientist or as a person, the most important thing, the thing that I consider myself to be blessed is that I end up doing what I want to do. So my work is exactly what I want to do. I mean, I come to my lab, I mean, not because I'm forced to, because somebody will control if I'm in the office or not. It's because I will do it for free. that's exactly what I want to be. That's exactly what I want to do. And I think if you manage to find what you really like, which is hard, it's not easy, but if you manage to realize what you really want, and if you manage to end up doing that, well, then you will have a passion that will take you every day to the lab to do exactly what you want to do.
Wonderful message to leave them with. Can you tell our listeners, if they want to learn more about you, Rodrigo, and the wonderful work that you're doing, where should they go?
They can check in our webpage. I'm not very good with social media. Actually, I don't do it, but the center manager keeps like a Twitter and Facebook, and some talks are in YouTube. So if you Google my name, you end up in our center's webpage. It's Center for Systems Neuroscience at the University of Leicester, and it's very easy to find. And there we put all our papers, we put interviews or videos or things we keep doing. So if people want to learn more about what we do, I think that's the best way.
Fantastic. Well, listeners, definitely check out those resources. Learn more about what Rodrigo is up to. He only was able to talk about a fraction of his fantastic work today. And Rodrigo, thank you so much for joining us today on the program.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks to you.
It was wonderful to chat with you. And listeners, great to have you here as well. We'll see you next time on another episode of People Behind the Science. Your voyage to explore the lives of today's exceptional scientists has just begun. You can find everything we talked about today, including our guests' favorite books, biographies, photos, and more, when you visit us at www.peoplebehindthescience.com. I look forward to chatting with you next time on People Behind the Science.